Have you ever believed someone's silence meant safety? That their calm, composed presence meant they had nothing to hide? What if the silence wasn't safety, but strategy? What if the one who said, "I'd never lie to you," was already living a lie? Welcome back to Mr. Charles Stories, where every story leaves you thinking, feeling, and remembering why your peace must always come first. Tonight's story is about loyalty, betrayal, and a woman who learned the hard way that even the quietest love can break the loudest. But this time, she doesn't disappear. She gets even, with her dignity intact. Have you ever trusted someone so much that you ignored your own instincts? Have you ever been promised loyalty, only to learn that promise had fine print? Let's begin. The city was cold the day Serene Vale met Kaylin Dreston. It wasn't the kind of cold that wrapped around your coat or made your hands shiver. It was the kind that sat in glass offices and waited in luxury silence. Kaylin was already a billionaire by then, young, calculated, and unreadable. People didn't say no to him. They didn't ask too many questions. They admired from a distance. But Serene was different. She wasn't hired to admire. She was hired to redesign the penthouse that overlooked all of Seattle. And she found him standing in the middle of the unfinished space, hands in his pockets, watching rain leak through a cracked skylight onto the marble floor. She didn't smile. She didn't flirt. She simply said, "You can fix this roof or turn it into a fountain. Either way, it needs a purpose." Kaylin turned to her slowly and laughed, just once. That was the first time someone had spoken to him like that. And that was the moment she unknowingly stepped into his world. Not just for the project, but for him. Serene wasn't drawn to power. She didn't care about wealth, headlines, or reputations. Her value wasn't tied to the zeros on a paycheck or the shine of a title. What she wanted was simple: honesty, peace, purpose. She carried herself with quiet strength, always dressed clean, always composed, never loud. She had the kind of presence that didn't need volume to be felt. Kaylin noticed. At first, he'd watch her work from a distance. No small talk, no unnecessary questions. But he started lingering during her site visits. He began asking why she chose that texture, that color, that design. Then came the nights. He stayed later when she stayed late. He offered coffee without asking if she needed it. He watched her sketch while she hummed songs softly under her breath. It wasn't flirtation. It was attention. And Kaylin Dreston didn't give attention freely. Their bond didn't start with declarations. There were no titles, no social media posts, no public hand-holding, but there was presence. Kaylin gave her his schedule access. No one else had that. He handed her the key to his apartment, not the guest one, the master one. He let her see him before the suit, before the headlines. They'd spend weekends in his penthouse with rain tapping the windows, both curled up under the same blanket. Sometimes watching old films, sometimes working side by side in silence. One evening, as they shared warm tea and the city lights blinked outside, Serene looked up and asked softly, "Do you ever think about us?" Kaylin didn't answer right away. He set his cup down, leaned back, and locked eyes with her. Then he said something she never forgot. "I think about how much I'd lose if I ever lied to you." That was his vow. He never said, "I love you," but he said that. And Serene, despite the warning in her gut, believed him. Loyalty. It became his quiet promise. He never introduced her to the board, never brought her to public events, but he gave her every sign that she was his only truth. He answered her calls, even in the middle of meetings. He never pulled away when they walked through the lobby together. And she thought, maybe this is how powerful men love. Not loudly, but intentionally. So she trusted him, until the gala. It was the one time she'd agreed to join him in public, the Elara Noir lounge, where Seattle's elite came to be seen, to be praised, to be envied. Kaylin never liked crowds, but that night he accepted the invitation and asked her to come. Serene chose a navy silk gown. Simple, elegant, hers. She didn't need to make a scene. Her presence would speak loud enough. They entered the lounge together. Cameras snapped. eyes turned. But Kaylin didn't flinch. He held her hand for the first time in front of others. It meant something, until she saw her. Maris Elrin, flawless, confident, strategic in every sense, standing near the executive bar, drink in hand, smile fixed. The way she looked at Kaylin said everything. She wasn't surprised to see him. She expected it, and Kaylin's hesitation, his pause mid-step, the way his fingers tightened, around Serin's for just a second, told Serin everything she needed to know. He walked over, greeted Maris with a kiss on the cheek. Not romantic, not scandalous, but deliberate, intentional. And when Serin approached, Kaylin turned, only to speak to someone else beside them. No introduction, no acknowledgement. She wasn't invisible. She was dismissed. That night, Serin didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam doors. She simply walked ahead of him into the penthouse and waited. Kaylin followed, removed his tie, loosened his collar. "She means nothing," he said. Serin turned slowly. "She touched you like she used to." It was a formality, business. "Then why didn't you introduce me?" He paused. That silence. It wasn't safety anymore. It was control. She didn't argue, but something inside her, something sacred, began to shift. She remembered what he said. "If I ever lied to you, I'd lose everything." And in that moment, she realized he already had. Not because of a woman, but because he thought she wouldn't notice. Because he thought her silence was weakness. But Serin Vale was done being silent. She would still speak quietly, but this time her actions would scream. Kaylin tried to move on like nothing happened. He returned to work the next day, attended 3 back-to-back meetings, and replied to emails with the same speed he always had. To anyone else, he looked unchanged, impenetrable. But Serin knew better. She watched the small shifts. How he no longer paused when entering a room with her in it. How he skipped the subtle, intimate glances. How his voice had an extra edge of calculation. She didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, she matched his silence. Not as submission, but as strategy. Serin wasn't going to argue for a place she had already earned. She was going to wait. Because a man like Kaylin always showed his real hand eventually. The emotional distance between them grew faster than she expected. He no longer stayed in on Sundays. She no longer asked where he went. Her toothbrush disappeared from the holder one morning. Quietly, no explanation. She didn't put it back. A week later, her favorite mug, the one he always used to make her morning tea, was in the dishwasher, untouched. It stayed there. They were unraveling by subtraction, piece by piece. But Kaylin still made one thing clear: "I've never cheated. I've never disrespected you." To him, absence wasn't betrayal. To her, it was. One Thursday afternoon, Serin arrived at Kaylin's downtown condo with a file of mood boards. She was helping him design a new luxury suite for a private client. He wasn't home. She let herself in, as usual. But something unusual caught her eye. A half-open drawer in the side office. Inside it, a slim manila folder marked with a name she hadn't heard since the gala. Maris Elrin. She froze. Her eyes scanned the label. Client, M. Elrin Project Manager, D. Rooston Design Concept, Executive Luxury Suite, Bellevue. The logo on the folder said, Dresden Consulting, a company Kaylin dissolved years ago. Or so she thought. She sat on the edge of the leather chair, heartbeat rising. This wasn't about furniture. It wasn't about architecture. This was about deception. He hadn't cheated on her physically, but emotionally. He had revived an old identity just to keep Maris off Serin's radar. That wasn't loyalty. That was preparation. She didn't cry. Instead, she took out her phone, snapped a photo of the document, and emailed it to herself under a hidden folder labeled Break File. She left before Kaylin returned. For the next few days, she said nothing. She kissed him goodnight. She ate dinner when he did. But her eyes no longer softened when she looked at him. They studied him. And when he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. She let him hold it. because she needed him to believe she hadn't figured it out yet. Kaylin was sharp in business, but dull in emotion. He could sense a merger cracking before it happened, but he couldn't feel the shift in her body language. He thought her silence meant recovery. He had no idea it meant calculation. That Sunday, Seren stayed late at her studio. She laid out every file she'd saved about Kaylin's hidden business ties, all the aliases, the financial transfers. She didn't care about the money. She cared about the pattern, and now she had a map, a full view of the man who had said, "I think about what I'd lose if I ever lied to you." She opened a clean notebook and began writing. Page 1. Every man has a breaking point, even the quiet ones. Monday morning came. Kaylin kissed her forehead before leaving for work. Seren stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the door shut. By the time he got to the office, she had packed 2 bags, one with clothes, the other with leverage. She moved into a modest studio across town. It wasn't furnished like Kaylin's penthouse, but it had something that place didn't: honesty. No lies hiding in drawers, no invoices tucked into folders, no names that made her stomach twist, just peace. Kaylin didn't text that night, not even to ask where she was. He noticed she wasn't home, but still, he stayed quiet. And that told her everything. 3 days later, he finally messaged, "Kaylin, I'm assuming this is one of your quiet storms. I'll be here when it passes." Seren smiled at the arrogance. He believed she was dramatic. He believed she would return. He didn't know she was documenting him. The next week, Kaylin showed up at her studio. No flowers, no apology, just a folder. "Before you spiral further," he said, "here's proof it's not what you think." Inside were printed emails between him and Maris, transaction logs, project summaries, everything clean and legal, and a photograph. Kaylin, Maris, a contractor, professional, distant, safe, but Seren saw through it. She handed him the photo. "Tell me something," she said. "Did you use your real name on this project?" Kaylin paused. "No," he said finally. "It was Dresden Consulting. Easier to handle through the old pipeline." Seren nodded slowly. "You kept a second identity," she said, "even after you promised there'd be no more secrets." Kaylin sighed. "I played it smart. Maris isn't a threat. She's leverage. That project helped close the Lawson deal." Seren tilted her head. "I trusted you to be loyal, not smart." He reached for her hand. She stepped back. "Do you love me?" he asked. She didn't blink. "Yes, but I also love myself." He swallowed hard. "Then don't let this ruin us." She smiled, just faintly. "You ruined us the moment you thought strategy was more important than honesty." Kaylin stood frozen. No defense, no plan, just silence. Now, it wasn't protective. It was pathetic. Seren stepped past him. She didn't slam the door. She didn't scream. But she did leave one thing behind. The photo of him and Maris, with a sticky note that said, "I see everything you tried to hide, and now others will too." What would you do if someone weaponized silence to protect their secrets? Have you ever walked away not to escape, but to rebuild with a plan? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And make sure you subscribe to Mr. Charles' Stories, where every story leaves you with a lesson worth remembering. The first thing Seren deleted was her guilt. She didn't mourn it. She didn't write about it in a journal. She deleted it like junk mail. Because guilt was for women who betrayed someone who kept their word. And Kaylin Dresden hadn't done that. He hadn't cheated on her with another woman. He cheated with another version of himself. The one he promised was gone. And that betrayal didn't deserve mourning. It deserved a blueprint. She spent the next week off the grid. No social posts, no text replies, no shared calendars. If Kaylin wanted access again, he would have to earn it with blood. And even then, she wasn't sure she'd give him an inch. Inside her new apartment, things were quiet, but not hollow. She wasn't waiting for him to knock. She wasn't hoping he'd call. She was building, gathering, tracking. It wasn't revenge born out of heartbreak. It was vengeance, shaped by clarity. Kaylin didn't take her dignity, he just reminded her why it must be protected with both hands. What he didn't know, Seren still had access to 2 of his back-end project dashboards. He hadn't revoked them, because in his mind, she was still harmless. Still the calm woman who made his home smell like cinnamon and lavender. Still the one who said nothing when his phone vibrated after midnight. He underestimated her, and she was going to let him. That Monday, Seren opened his current project files, his biggest deal of the year, the Alder Heights merger. $480 million on the table. Key stakeholders watching every move. Seren read through every page of internal notes, planning to find nothing at first. But then she saw it. Interior consulting partner, M. Elren. Her mouth went dry. So, Maris wasn't gone. She was embedded, officially, professionally, rebranded as an advisor. Kaylin had woven her into the one space Seren used to own, his aesthetic vision. That wasn't oversight. That was replacement. She closed the document, leaned back in her chair, and smiled. It wasn't a sweet smile. It was sharp, like a weapon recently sharpened. Kaylin was no longer a man to mourn. He was a man to dismantle. The next morning, Seren emailed a silent tip to the board of Alder Heights. Anonymous, no emotional words, no accusations, just data. A clean summary with attachments showing Dresden Consulting's overlap with a personal entity tied to one of their merger consultants, without disclosure. It would trigger a pause in the due diligence process, which meant delays, which meant questions, which meant Kaylin would finally feel pressure from something other than her silence. Meanwhile, she applied for a temporary position at a boutique architecture firm downtown, not because she needed the money, but because she needed distance. People there didn't know her as Kaylin's maybe partner. They just knew her as Seren Vale, a woman who sketched better than half the team and listened more than most clients deserved. The office was smaller, but it felt wider. No lies in the walls, no secrets in the desks, just space to think. One afternoon, during a client brainstorm, she got a text from an unknown number. The board froze the merger. "Is this you?" She didn't reply. 2 hours later, "You made your point. Can we talk?" Still no response. Seren wasn't reacting. She was collecting. She still had the sketchbook Kaylin had mailed her a month back, the one with her early drawings. On the last page, he'd written, "Remind me of who I was when we met." She read it again, then scribbled underneath in her own handwriting, "You were a man hiding a second name and calling it love." At night, she listened to Kaylin's interviews online. He was still charming, still well-dressed, still careful with every word. But something in his eyes had changed. Less certainty, more edge. He looked like a man trying not to unravel, and she liked it. 2 weeks later, Kaylin finally called from his real number. She picked up on the second ring. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" Her voice was calm. "For the delay. You bought me time. The board's giving us another week." Seren smiled into the silence. "Kaylin," she said softly, "I didn't do it for you." A beat. Then why? She leaned against the window of her new place. "Because someone on that board has a daughter. And I needed her to know what it looks like when a man lies with a spreadsheet." Click. She ended the call. He didn't call back. The next day, her application to lead a design panel at the Seattle Business Women's Forum was accepted. She didn't include Kaylin's name on her resume. She didn't need to. Her work was enough. It always had been. Meanwhile, Kaylin stood in front of his floor-to-ceiling windows, rereading Seren's words in his mind. You were a man hiding a second name and calling it love. He wanted to hate her, but all he could feel was panic, because now he realized she wasn't the one who lost something. He was. And not just a woman, not just a partner, but the last version of himself who could tell the truth and still be respected. Seren didn't want him ruined. She wanted him revealed, because when powerful men fall, it isn't the crash that defines them. It's what they grab on the way down. And Kaylin? He was still trying to grab control. still calling his deception strategy, still hoping Seren would forgive. But she didn't plan to. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What she did plan, to show every woman watching, every woman who ever swallowed her instincts, that peace isn't passive. Sometimes peace comes after the explosion. And Seren, she was just lighting the fuse. Kaylin hated the feeling of not being in control. But that was exactly where he stood now, watching Seren move like a shadow outside his grasp, unpredictable, unreadable. She wasn't loud. She didn't post anything, didn't send a final message, didn't demand closure. But her absence was deafening. Worse, it was precise. After the merger delay, Kaylin's entire executive team went into recovery mode. The press release had already been drafted. The champagne was already ordered. And then, compliance questions hit from inside the board. Nothing scandalous yet, but enough to make everyone pause. Enough to shift Maris from asset to potential liability. And Kaylin knew it hadn't come from a journalist. It came from someone who wanted him uncomfortable, cornered, exposed. Only one person fit that profile. Seren. He tried to reason with himself. Maybe she acted emotionally. Maybe she didn't understand what was at stake. But deep down, he knew. Seren didn't act emotionally. She acted with evidence. And her evidence was solid. Because he had left a trail. One he thought she would never follow. She didn't care about revenge in the usual sense. No public scandal. No lawsuits. No Instagram tell-alls. But she was hitting him in the only place that mattered to a man like him. Leverage. Kaylin walked into the next investor meeting with a forced smile. He answered every question calmly, but his mind wasn't there. He was replaying every moment he underestimated her. Every time he dismissed her silence as softness. Every time he said she means nothing and thought it was enough. He didn't see it then, but now it was clear. Seren's power wasn't in what she said. It was in what she could undo without raising her voice. Meanwhile, Seren continued her quiet rise. The Seattle Business Women's Forum invited her to speak on sustainable design with integrity. She accepted, not because she needed the spotlight, but because it gave her something Kaylin never did, a platform without dependency. During her panel, a moderator asked, "What's the biggest mistake designers make when working with powerful clients?" Seren smiled, soft but sharp. "Confusing access with respect," she said. "Just because someone opens a door for you doesn't mean they value your presence. Watch what they hide." The crowd clapped. Someone from Alder Heights took note. Later that evening, she received a call from one of the board members. Not official, just conversational. He asked about her insights on ethical partnerships. She offered her thoughts. Never once mentioned Kaylin, but every example she gave mirrored his behavior. And that was enough. By morning, Maris was removed from the advisory team. Kaylin received the email on his private line. The message was clear. Clean up or lose the deal. He sat alone in his glass office, watching the skyline he built. The same skyline he once shared with Seren. Her sketches in his hand, her voice offering edits to his vision. He remembered the night he told her, "I think about how much I'd lose if I ever lied to you." And now, piece by piece, he was losing it all. Not because she shouted, but because she calculated. Kaylin made one last move. He emailed Seren. Subject, still yours? The body read, "You once said home isn't a place. It's the peace you feel when someone sees you fully. I never gave you that peace, but you gave me clarity. If there's any part of you that still remembers who we were, I'll be at the penthouse. No games, no plans, just me." She read it 3 times, didn't respond, but she put on a coat and walked. Kaylin was waiting. No security, no wine, no grand setup, just him on the couch, holding a coffee mug she hadn't seen in months. Her mug. He stood when she entered, didn't speak, waited. She walked to the center of the room, stared at him. "And then, when you created a second name for yourself, I covered for you. When you told me she was business, I looked the other way. But you didn't stop at one mistake. You made a lifestyle out of dishonesty. So, why am I here? He opened his mouth, closed it, then said, because even now, you don't believe in destroying people. You just want them to feel the truth. She blinked once, took a breath, then walked to the door, paused, looked over her shoulder. I didn't come here to forgive you. I came here to make sure you know. You were never betrayed. You were simply outplayed. And then she left. Kaylin sat back down, alone, finally understanding. Serin didn't need vengeance. She needed correction. And now his entire empire was being restructured without her fingerprints ever being seen. That was power, the kind that doesn't need a title. Just truth. Serin went home that night and made tea. In silence. Not sadness. Relief. Her peace had been returned. By her own hands. Not through love. Through accountability. The Elara Noir lounge never forgot faces. Especially not the kind of faces that came in dressed in navy silk, trailing silence instead of noise. Serin Vale hadn't been back since the gala. But tonight, she was returning. Not with Kaylin. Not as the hidden guest of a billionaire, but as the featured speaker for a Women in Business spotlight event, hosted right inside the same glassy gold-lit walls where her dignity had once been dismissed. She stepped out of the car with calm shoulders and unshakable grace. Her dress was deeper blue this time, sapphire, fitted, clean. Her heels didn't announce her, they whispered power. A small pin with her initials, SV, shimmered against her neckline. Not a brand, a statement. She wasn't here to be remembered. She was here so no one could ever forget. Inside the lounge, the room pulsed with soft music and filtered laughter. Industry leaders, magazine editors, and curious observers filled the space. Serin walked through the center with her head held high. Every step forward erased what Kaylin tried to bury her under. The moderator approached with a smile. Serin, you look radiant. Thank you, she said. Let's keep it honest tonight. Across the city, Kaylin received a calendar alert. Serin Vale at Elara Noir. He didn't plan to attend, until his phone buzzed again with a photo. Serin, on the event banner, standing where he once made her invisible, and something inside him cracked. He arrived 40 minutes later. No announcement, just a quiet entrance through the back valet. He stood near the corner, beside a wall of bottled scotch and spotlighted paintings, watching her, like everyone else. Serin took the stage without notes, without a mic. She didn't need volume, just truth. I used to believe loyalty came from presence, she began. If someone stayed, showed up, held your hand, they were loyal. But that's not loyalty. That's proximity, and proximity can be strategic. She paused. Let that land. Someone in the audience shifted, uneasy. Serin smiled gently and continued. Real loyalty shows up in absence, when no one's watching, when you're not even part of the room, and yet they speak your name with honor. Heads nodded. Even Kaylin. Especially Kaylin. Serin glanced at the back corner. She saw him, didn't flinch. Instead, she said, I had to leave a version of my life to find the truth. And when I did, I realized, some people don't deserve confrontation. They deserve consequences. Applause. She stepped down, back straight, eyes ahead, and she never looked toward Kaylin again. Later that night, he followed her out to the valet line. She didn't look surprised, only tired, not weak. Just done. You were incredible, he said. She nodded. Silence. Then, did you think I wouldn't rebuild? No, he said quietly. I thought you'd forgive. She laughed, sharp and soft at once. I did forgive. Pause. I forgave myself for staying too long. Her car pulled up. She stepped in, closed the door, and the engine rolled forward. Kaylin stood there, cold. Elara Noir behind him, the memory of a woman who used to walk beside him now miles ahead. Inside the car, Serin stared out the window. She didn't cry, didn't sigh. She was too focused for that. Because she knew something Kaylin never would. A woman who learns to walk away doesn't walk back. She walks forward, with purpose. And this was just her beginning. Kaylin didn't sleep that night. The image of Serin on stage at Elara Noir looped in his mind. Not because she looked beautiful, she always did, but because she no longer looked breakable. He replayed every word she spoke. Some people don't deserve confrontation. They deserve consequences. And she hadn't said his name once. That made it worse. He used to believe he could fix anything with money, strategy, or time. But Serin had taken none of those offers. And somehow, in rejecting them all, she built something louder than any of his skyscrapers. A presence without proximity. Now she was being quoted on podcasts, featured in business blogs. The same men who used to ask Kaylin about her in private were now reposting her public wisdom. And Kaylin? He was being asked if she was ever really just his designer. He didn't have an answer that didn't embarrass him. Back in her apartment, Serin was cutting ties. Quietly, she unsubscribed from a dozen luxury newsletters Kaylin had once signed her up for. She deleted their shared cloud folders. She returned the final of his gifts, a watch engraved with until no date. Just that word. She shipped it back with a note, until you chose her. But vengeance wasn't just about messages. It was about elevation. So Serin focused on her craft. She pitched her firm for a major hotel redesign in Denver. They were skeptical at first, said her portfolio was impressive, but modest. Until she submitted her pitch deck with her full credits, they noticed something. One of her designs matched the signature aesthetic of Dresden's Pacific Lofts, Kaylin's most famous property. She never boasted. She simply stated, the concept was mine. The silence was his. She got the deal. Meanwhile, Kaylin sat in a silent boardroom as Alder Heights finalized the merger. They cut his equity offer by 12%. Not enough to bankrupt him, but enough to bruise. The board cited misalignment of external consultants. Kaylin didn't argue. He couldn't, because Serin hadn't just wounded his love life. She'd exposed the flaw in his leadership. He hid people, even the good ones. A week later, a journalist reached out for a feature titled, The Minds Behind the Modern Skyline. They asked Kaylin for a quote about his early collaborators. He submitted a short one. Serin Vale taught me that vision is nothing without integrity. It didn't go viral, but she saw it. And she didn't respond. Serin had moved on. She hosted a workshop for young female architects. Opened it with this. You don't have to burn down his empire. Just build something taller beside it. They applauded. Some cried. Kaylin watched the clip online, paused it, replayed it, and finally accepted she wasn't coming back. Not because she hated him, but because she no longer needed to explain why she left. Her growth had answered every question. Months passed. Seattle moved on. Deals were signed. Press cycles faded. But the consequences of one man's secrets remained. And Serin, she was no longer the woman in Kaylin's penthouse. She was the architect of her own peace, of her own power. One afternoon, Serin walked past one of Kaylin's new buildings downtown. It was beautiful, precise, soulless. She glanced up at the name etched in glass, then walked past without stopping. No bitterness, no sadness, just closure. Because now, when people saw her designs, they didn't ask, wasn't she with? They said, that's Serin Vale, and that was enough. Kaylin Dresden believed in records, invoices, wire transfers, NDAs, everything tracked, filed, stored. That's what made Serin's discovery so cutting, because the very thing he relied on to stay clean was what exposed him. It began on a quiet Tuesday. Serin was consulting on a minimalist estate for a high-end client just outside of Denver. A fresh start, new market, new project, clean canvas. Until her junior associate, a recent grad with sharp eyes, handed her a sample invoice from the client's previous designer. You asked me to check sourcing references, the girl said. This one caught my eye. It's formatted differently. Serin glanced at the document. The client name read Maris Elron. The firm listed Dresden Interiors. But the signature? D. Rouston. Serin didn't blink. Didn't show a flicker of reaction. "Thanks," she said, calmly. "I'll review this personally." She waited until she got home, sat at her desk, and read every line like it was a betrayal dressed in Helvetica font. Kalin hadn't just collaborated with Maris. He'd continued doing business with her after Serin left. Not by mistake, but under the same alias he once used to hide Serin from his board. He was still playing the same game, only now she wasn't in the room. She was in the audience, and this time she wasn't going to leave silently. Kalin, meanwhile, was in Manhattan, finalizing talks for a new international expansion. His name was trending again. A feature in Architect Digest praised his signature cold elegance. They called him the Ice King of urban luxury. He laughed when he read it, had no idea the frost was forming at his back. Serin didn't go public. She didn't leak anything. She simply made a phone call. A quiet one. To a legal firm in Seattle that specialized in professional ethics cases. No lawsuits. Just one request. "Can you draft a formal inquiry letter to Dresden Enterprises on behalf of an anonymous client? Ask why an inactive consultant is signing active project documents under a dissolved alias. Request clarity on liability in event of a breach." The lawyer didn't ask questions. Within 48 hours, the letter landed on Kalin's general counsel's desk. And Kalin? He didn't even know until the CFO walked into his office with a red folder. "You know anything about this?" the CFO asked, brow raised. Kalin skimmed it once, stopped at the name D. Rouston, then again at M. Elron. His stomach dropped. He closed the folder slowly. No, he lied. The CFO stared. "You might want to clean this up. Fast." Serin sat across the country sipping warm tea, watching her email inbox light up with alerts. Legal movements, disclosures filed, an internal memo leaked. Suddenly, Dresden Consulting was a name Kalin could no longer hide behind. And Maris, she vanished again. Only this time, not because Kalin pushed her away, but because the industry did. Serin didn't touch her. She just removed the umbrella Kalin used to protect her, and let the rain do its work. Later that week, Kalin finally sent an email. Subject: "We need to talk." She didn't respond. So he tried again. "Kalin, you said you'd never come after me. That peace mattered more than revenge." "Serin, this isn't revenge. It's reflection, with receipts." He didn't reply. What could he say? He knew she was right. Every lie had his signature on it. Every invoice was a mirror. And Serin? She was just holding it up. She forwarded the same set of documents to 3 boutique firms she'd been in talks with. Each one had once hesitated to bring her on. Now, they saw something else. A woman who not only knew design, but how to protect a brand from scandal. She wasn't a risk. She was protection. By the end of the month, Serin signed a deal with a new partner. Co-founder status. No investor strings. Just her team, and a penthouse office that looked out over the same skyline Kalin once ruled. Only now, she had something he never would. Clean hands. And a louder name. Kalin didn't panic until his investors started calling. Not all at once. Not loudly. But steadily. "Hey Kyle, saw that inquiry letter online. Everything good? We've got compliance tightening over here. Need to make sure your side's clean. Is that old alias stuff a risk to our joint brand?" Kalin answered the same way every time, all handled. Nothing to worry about. But each call felt heavier, and each silence from Serin felt sharper. He wasn't afraid of exposure. He was afraid of irrelevance, and that's what Serin was making him feel. Like a man who once mattered, now watching someone else control the temperature of his reputation. She hadn't destroyed his empire. She simply changed the way people whispered about him. Before, he's brilliant. Now, he's reckless. He flew back to Seattle to meet with his internal team. fired 2 mid-level managers, reassigned the legal consultant who missed the Dresden alias conflict. He thought that would make him feel powerful again. It didn't. Because power, real power, wasn't in removing people. It was in being unshakable. And right now, he was shaking. Serin, meanwhile, was meeting with her new partner in a building 2 blocks from where Kalin once offered her a quiet key to his penthouse. The irony wasn't lost on her. This time, she held the keys. This time, she built the lobby. She designed the conference rooms. She chose every light fixture and finish. Not for Kalin, not in spite of him, but because she'd outgrown needing proximity to be valid. Her new firm wasn't massive, but it was clean, and her name was on the door. Vale and Marin's studio, where women designed without apology, where silence wasn't used to protect men, but to power decisions. On her 3rd week, she got a package, no return label. Inside, a single envelope, and one of Kalin's original project invoices from the first estate they worked on together. But something was different. Handwritten on the back were words she recognized. "You made it mean something." "I didn't. You designed my piece and I still broke it. I wish I could tell the world I was the lucky one. But they already know." There was no signature, just a folded photo, the one she took of them both, before things got complicated, her hand in his eyes closed, unaware she was even holding the camera. Serin read it twice, then set it down. She didn't cry, not because she was cold, but because she had already bled. This wasn't an apology. It was a eulogy, and the person being buried was Kalin's idea of himself. That night, she hosted a dinner for local design students in her studio, laughed, answered questions, told her story, not the Kalin part, but the important parts. How not to wait for validation. How not to let loyalty be defined by someone who thinks access is affection. How to trust your instincts before your heart. Kalin watched the dinner online. A student had posted clips to TikTok. She was glowing, relaxed, powerful. No bitterness in her tone. No trace of him in her words. He was no longer the villain. He was just gone. And that hurt more. The next day, Kalin sent one last message. "Kalin, I know I can't ask for your forgiveness, but if I ever cross your mind, I hope it's not with regret. I hope it's with clarity. You deserved better, and I'm sorry I wasn't ready to be it." Serin never replied. She didn't need to, because her clarity didn't come from what he said. It came from what he did, and what he did was exactly why she was never going back. Months later, Vale and Marin won a national award for ethical design and emerging leadership. Serin walked on stage, held her speech in one hand, said this with a calm voice. "Every blueprint has layers, so does every betrayal. But the foundation, that's built in silence. Let yours be strong enough to stand when others try to collapse it." Somewhere in a quiet corner of a hotel suite, Kalin watched that clip. Alone. In the very suite Maris once tried to design with him. Now unused. Now irrelevant. Just like him. There's a difference between disappearing and departing. One is escape. The other is execution. Serin Vale didn't disappear when she left Kalin. She departed, with intention, with evidence, and with her name still sharp in every room he thought he controlled. It started the night she moved out. No boxes, no noise. Just one suitcase, one sketchbook, and a folder labeled "When he asks why." She didn't wait for him to come home. She left the key on the kitchen island, next to the untouched coffee mug he used to pour for her on Sundays. No letter, no drawn-out goodbye, only that folder, and in it, a copy of the Maris invoice, screenshots of unrevoked consulting access, a time-stamped memo showing he logged into the Dresden alias just 3 weeks after swearing it, was shut down. Each page, a mirror, each line, a quiet confession he never expected her to find. Kalin returned home just past midnight, kicked off his shoes, loosened his collar, and called out her name once, half asleep. No answer. Then he saw the mug, the folder, and his chest tightened. He opened it, read, didn't move for 5 minutes, then sank into the chair she used to sit in while sketching, and said nothing, because he knew this wasn't a mistake. This was a pattern, finally exposed. By the next morning, Serin had turned off their shared location, unsubscribed, from their shared cloud, and cut off all personal calendar syncs. But she left his business calendar visible, not as a mistake. As a reminder, she wanted to know what buildings he was still designing while he claimed to be rebuilding trust. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't leaving someone blind, it's letting them see you gone. Kalin didn't chase her. He thought he had time, thought the silence meant she was healing. But Serin wasn't healing. She was planning. She contacted an old mentor from her architecture school days, a woman named Zarela Guy, founder of one of the first minority-owned firms to compete nationally in luxury design. Zarela had once offered Serin a position after graduation. Serin had turned it down for Kalin. Now, she reached out with a clean resume. No plea, no apology, just this note: I'm no longer standing beside anyone else's name. I'm ready to build my own. Zarela responded within hours. Come by Thursday. Bring only your truth. Meanwhile, Kalin was still trying to protect what was left of his image. He hadn't spoken to Maris since the inquiry letter went public. She was gone, detached, no farewell, and without her, the alias collapsed. Dresden Consulting was officially listed as inactive with unresolved conflicts. That meant deals were being re-evaluated, not just paused, but reassessed, with compliance teams asking one dangerous question: if he hid this, what else? Kalin tried to spin it, tried to say it was a legal formality, but investors didn't buy formality anymore. They bought consistency. And Serin? She had proven his inconsistency without ever raising her voice. Thursday came. Serin met Zarela at a rooftop workspace in Capitol Hill. The view overlooked the cranes Kalin once called his legacy. Zarela looked her over, smiled and said, "You're not rebuilding, you're rerouting. Difference is, now you own the map." Serin exhaled. It was the first time in months she felt still, not reactive, not hurt, just still. And in that stillness, she saw the truth. She hadn't walked away from Kalin. She had walked toward herself. By the following week, Serin had signed on to co-lead a multi-unit project in DC with Zarela's firm. It was quiet work, no cameras, no headlines, just blueprints, meetings, and late-night revisions. And Serin felt full again, not because of recognition, but because every hour spent wasn't shadowed by the fear of being erased. Kalin heard the news second-hand. A junior architect from his firm saw Serin's name on a zoning request, sent a screenshot with the message, "She's not playing small anymore." Kalin didn't reply. He forwarded the message to himself and archived it. That night, he walked through his penthouse. It was quiet. Same floor-to-ceiling glass, same views. But without Serin, it felt like a showroom. Polished, staged, empty. He opened her old sketchbook again, flipped to a page she once drew of him, seated, unaware, head tilted toward the window. He looked peaceful in the sketch, but now, he realized, she'd drawn it on the day he lied about Maris. It wasn't a portrait. It was proof she saw everything, even then. Serin, on the other hand, had started journaling again. Not about Kalin, about her future firm, ideas, missions, names. One page simply read, "Build rooms where no one asks you to shrink." She wasn't waiting for him to reach out. She didn't need closure. She had an exit strategy, and it worked. Kalin thought she'd call eventually, not to reconcile, not to apologize, but to say something, anything. After all, wasn't that how endings worked? One person walked away and the other reached back, if only for closure. But Serin Vale wasn't reaching back. She was writing forward. The co-led project in DC started picking up national attention, not for drama, for design. A mid-rise eco-residential structure with sustainable interiors and community-led planning. Bold lines, quiet elegance. Publications called it a blueprint for rebuilding urban trust. They had no idea how ironic that was. Kaylin read those words over coffee, and it burned worse than the heat. Serin never mentioned Kaylin by name, but the story was everywhere. The woman who left a powerful man and quietly rewrote her narrative through excellence, not exposure. She wasn't a headline. She was an evolution. Meanwhile, Kaylin was battling shadows. One investor pulled out of a pending deal, citing reputational caution. A speaking engagement cancelled on short notice. The keynote was reassigned to Zarela. And who sat beside her on the panel? Serin Vale. A photo of them smiling together circulated online. Not viral, but visible. And for Kaylin, that visibility was worse than scandal, because it wasn't angry. It was unbothered. He walked into a partners' meeting the next day, tension sharp in his shoulders. One of the senior members said plainly, "We're not questioning your vision, Kaylin. We're questioning your judgment." And Kaylin knew this wasn't about betrayal anymore. This was about consequence. Across the country, Serin kept her phone silent during office hours, focused on glass layouts and client feedback. But she had a new rule now. If any deal even smelled like secrecy, she walked. If any collaborator confused charm for integrity, she shut it down. She no longer tolerated vague lines or unclear motives. Because once you've loved a man who hides behind silence, you learn how to hear lies that never needed sound. Her new assistant once asked her, gently, "Was it hard leaving someone like Kaylin Dreston?" Serin smiled. Leaving was the easy part. Believing I deserved better. That took longer. By mid-month, Kaylin reached out again. This time, through a letter. No envelope. Hand-delivered by a private courier. Inside, "I once told you I thought about what I'd lose if I ever lied to you. And now I know. I lost someone who saw me when I was too blind to value it. You didn't just walk away, you walked forward. And I finally understand what loyalty costs. I hope your name ends up on every building I once thought was mine." No return address, no attempt to get her back. Only surrender. Serin read the letter once, folded it, placed it in the same drawer as her signed business contracts, then got back to work, because grief had already passed. And growth was in session. Her firm's rebrand was complete. No longer Vale and Marin. Just 5ALE. Simple, clear, independent. No shared name. No hidden partners. Just her. Kaylin's story faded slowly. Not in shame, but in silence. He still designed, still built. But no one asked about his eye anymore. They asked, "Who's your lead?" And it was never him. Serin's buildings began showing up in features. First local, then national, then global. One writer described her as a woman who doesn't raise her voice, but raises standards in every space she enters. The last time Kaylin saw her, it wasn't in person. It was on the back cover of a design magazine. She was standing in front of a building she helped erect, wearing grey, no jewelry, no smile, just power. Her quote read, "You don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to be impossible to ignore." And Kaylin? He closed the magazine slowly, set it down, and realized he hadn't been defeated. He'd been replaced by the woman who was never in his shadow, only in waiting. Have you ever let someone believe you were weak, only to come back stronger, quieter, and unstoppable? Comment "I built without them" if you've ever turned heartbreak into legacy. And subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories for stories where silence leads to power, and dignity always wins. There's a particular silence that follows a man who thought he could never be replaced. Kaylin Dreston walked into his boardroom and found it full, but none of them looked at him like they used to. They used to admire him, defer, wait for him to speak. Now, they looked past him, around him, toward the numbers on the screen, not the man who used to define them. He still wore the suit, still spoke with clarity, but the energy was gone, and he knew why. Serin Vale had rewritten his narrative, and she didn't even need to say his name. He took a sip of coffee during the third quarter review, and his hand shook. No one noticed. No one cared. He excused himself early, walked to the elevator, and thought back to the moment everything began to unravel. It wasn't the invoice. It wasn't the board inquiry. It was the day she left him the key and folder and didn't say goodbye. That folder had held more than documents. It held leverage, not the kind that blackmailed, the kind that exposed. Meanwhile, Seren had adjusted to her new rhythm. Mornings started early, but not rushed. No last-minute panic to match someone else's schedule. Her name was on the office lease now. Her hand was on every design decision. No one interrupted her mid-thought. No one filtered her through their brand. She was the brand. Her firm's latest project involved a historic museum renovation, funded by a group of progressive donors who cared more about integrity than headlines. And they wanted her, not her resume, not her connections, her name, her clarity, her track record for rebuilding without leaving a mess behind. One afternoon, while reviewing elevation sketches, she got a message from Zarella. Media is asking if you'll comment on Kaylin's exit from Crestview deal. Your call. Seren looked at her phone for a long second, then typed, "Silence is my comment. His outcomes are my answers." Kaylin had just been informed Crestview Partners was withdrawing from their pending $90 million joint development. Reason: public clarity issues regarding former partnerships. No press statement, no phone call, just a line in a termination email. He stared at it, realized something brutal. This wasn't Seren taking revenge. This was Seren being visible, and her visibility had made him a liability. Later that night, Kaylin stood at his penthouse window. The skyline he helped build still glowed, but it didn't feel like his anymore. He didn't see ambition. He saw what-ifs. What if he had told the truth? What if he had protected her reputation instead of his power? What if he had chosen loyalty before leverage? But regrets are only useful when someone's still listening. And Seren? She was too far ahead to look back. The next morning, Seren arrived at her office to find 2 gift bags on her desk. One was from a new intern, just a small thank you card. The other, no name, just black tissue paper and a handwritten note tucked inside. "You taught me that legacy is measured by who still speaks your name in rooms you're no longer in." It was from someone she hadn't seen since her university days. A peer. A woman who once interned under Kaylin and who had been warned, softly, not to overshadow him. That woman was now head of design at a rising competitor, and she was giving Seren her flowers, literally and figuratively. Seren placed the note inside her drawer, not for sentiment, but as proof that power can be reclaimed without aggression. That truth doesn't need a megaphone when it has receipts, and that when you walk away with grace, the world follows your steps, not your noise. Kaylin didn't want a scandal. He wanted control. But what Seren did was worse than scandal. She took back her narrative and made him irrelevant in the process. No interviews, no takedowns. She just built, elevated, moved forward. And the people who used to whisper about their relationship, now they whispered about her wins. He sat at a table during an investor summit in Los Angeles, listening to a panel on architectural voices shaping urban living. A familiar name was on the speaker list: Seren Vale, founder, Vale Studio. She walked onto the stage in a charcoal grey suit. No frills, no apology. A woman who had nothing to prove, but proved everything by standing there. Kaylin leaned back in his seat. Let the moment sting, because this was supposed to be him, his stage, his legacy. But he'd buried himself in ambition and forgotten to protect the only person who gave that ambition depth. Seren started her talk with a simple line: "Design isn't about what you add, it's about what you no longer have to explain." The audience leaned in. Kaylin froze, because that was a direct echo of something he once said to her in private. He never imagined she'd remember. She did, and she used it without naming him, because it belonged to her now. Everything they built, everything he hid, everything she uncovered, all of it was hers. After the summit, Kaylin approached quietly, not to interrupt, just to watch her from across the lobby as she took photos with students and shook hands with editors. She looked relaxed, not happy, not sad, whole, and that was something he hadn't seen before, not even when they were together, especially not then. He left without speaking. No need. She already knew he was there, and still didn't flinch. Back in Seattle, Seren returned to her studio and met with her team to discuss a multi-city expansion. Miami, Chicago, Portland. Each new project was signed under veil. No partners, no aliases, no dilution. When they asked why now, she answered clearly, "Because I no longer wait for clean exits to start clean beginnings." That line ended up on a client's social post, and then on a poster at a design conference. And soon, it was quoted beside her name in an article Kalin couldn't avoid, because it was printed next to one of his own ads. Days later, Kalin received a visitor. Not Seren, a rep from a university planning committee. "We're building a mentorship fund," she said, "targeting women in design. Seren's leading it. You're one of the top 5 names she suggested we don't approach." He swallowed hard. Why? Not because of reputation, because of influence. Her influence. At home, Kalin stood in front of the mirror and finally said it out loud. "I didn't lose her. I lost who I could have been with her." And once he said it, the room stayed quiet, because there was nothing else to say. Seren, that same night, journaled a single sentence. He thought silence was safety. I turned it into a sentence, and that sentence had reshaped the way she walked into every rooms. Seren never opened the final box he sent. It arrived 3 months after her name first made headlines as the youngest recipient of the West Coast Architectural Legacy Award. No card, no branding, just a plain white box. Inside, an original sketch she had drawn, one she believed was lost, framed. Behind the glass, a small note tucked in the corner. "You said I never saw you. This is proof I did. I just chose blindness." She closed the box. Didn't hang the sketch. Didn't burn it either. She placed it in the back of a drawer. Because some things weren't meant to be destroyed. They were meant to be remembered. Quietly, so they wouldn't be repeated. Kalin, on the other hand, had nothing left to send. Not that it would have mattered. Every attempt he made to bridge the silence had been met with the same response. None. It wasn't that Seren hated him. She just no longer needed to respond. And that was a harder ending to accept than rage or scandal. He moved into a smaller unit. Sold the penthouse. Too much space for one man. Too many corners she once lit up without ever trying. He kept the sketch she drew of him by the window, faded and bent at the corners now. It was the only part of her he allowed in the new space. But even that felt dishonest, because it wasn't her anymore. She had evolved beyond that sketch, and he hadn't caught up. Back in her studio, Seren stood before a group of interns. They were presenting early concepts for a community center project. Nervous energy buzzed through the room. She smiled at one of them, a girl who looked exactly like Seren did at 23, quiet, strong, afraid to be too bold. After the presentation, the girl lingered, asked softly, "How did you survive being overlooked?" Seren didn't hesitate. "I stopped asking to be seen and started building where no one could ignore me." The girl nodded, and Seren saw it, that moment of shift, the same shift she had once fought to find inside herself. That night, Seren went home to a space filled with intention. Everything she owned had a story. Nothing borrowed. No gifts kept from ghosts of past promises. She poured tea, sat by the window, and smiled, not because she was proud, but because she was still, and that kind of peace, you couldn't send it in a box. Kalin scrolled through an article the next morning. The headline read, "Vail Studio to lead affordable luxury project in Atlanta, changing who gets to live beautifully." He read the quote 3 times. "We don't just design for people who have everything, we design for those who deserve more." Seren Vail. He put the phone down, closed his eyes, and said out loud, to no one, "She's still designing for peace." He reached for his old phone, drafted a message, "I know I don't deserve your words, but I'll never stop remembering them." He deleted it before pressing send. That was his growth, finally understanding that closure wasn't something she owed him. It was something he had to build for himself, quietly, privately, with no expectation of applause. Kaylin stood in front of a mirror one morning and didn't recognize the man staring back. Not because he looked broken, but because he finally looked real. The polished image was fading. The curated composure cracked just enough to let in something he hadn't felt in years: awareness. Not of the empire he'd built, of what it had cost. His assistant mentioned in passing that Vale Studio was now consulting for a sustainable city block initiative near the university Kaylin once donated millions to. They hadn't invited him this time. Didn't even reference his old work, but Serin's name was on every design board. Her ideas were shaping the place where he once tried to establish legacy through money. And now, hers was being carved through purpose. Serin didn't attend the kickoff event in person. She sent her team and a short video message. Designing space is about more than walls. It's about who feels safe inside them. The crowd applauded. A student posted the clip online with the caption, "She's not designing buildings, she's designing boundaries." It went viral, not because it was flashy, but because it was true. Kaylin saved the clip, didn't watch it again. He didn't need to. The words stayed with him like everything she ever said. Never loud, but unforgettable. He opened the last drawer in his apartment, the one with Serin's sketch, the one gift she never meant to give back. He took it out, framed it differently, removed the old matting she once joked looked too calculated. Let the pencil lines breathe. Let her vision breathe. He hung it on a plain white wall. No spotlight, no branding, just her work. Meanwhile, Serin approved a final draft for a joint art and architecture fellowship in her name. The Vale Initiative, focused on women rebuilding after betrayal, loss, or professional silencing. No fanfare, just access, just space. She received hundreds of applications in days. Some came with long letters, some with single-line bios. One simply said, "I left the job, the man, and the lie. I'm ready to design what's next." Serin wrote back personally, "That's exactly why we exist." She didn't tell anyone Kaylin had donated to the fund anonymously. She didn't acknowledge it, didn't return it. She just noted it quietly in the ledger. Pain redirected is still a resource. That was her lesson. One evening, she walked by the building where she and Kaylin once shared their final glass of wine before it all cracked. The lights were dimmer now, the lobby more modern, but the memory flickered. He had once said, "I'd never lie to you," and she had believed it. Not because he was convincing, but because she wanted to. She stood there a moment longer, then walked past, not with anger, with knowing, and that was enough. Kaylin never asked her to come back, not because he didn't want her to, because he finally understood. You don't ask a woman to return to what she rebuilt herself to survive leaving. He folded the last letter he ever wrote her, never mailed it, never signed it, just kept it. As proof he had learned something, that some gifts are meant to be unopened, because what they hold is no longer needed. Kaylin used to say the skyline belonged to him, not out loud, never publicly, but in his mind, every tower with glass edges and clean symmetry felt like a signature, a silent reminder that he had shaped a city with vision and money. But now, he stood in the lobby of his latest high-rise, one he once called his legacy build, and realized he felt nothing. The walls were perfect. The design was sleek. The finishes flawless. Still, it felt hollow, because she was no part of it. He remembered the early sketches Serin once doodled on his desk, not for work, just for fun. She had drawn towers with rooftop gardens, warm lighting, and small spaces for people to sit, because, as she'd once said, people don't just want height, they want comfort. He hadn't listened then. Now, other firms were quoting her. Designs inspired by comfort over command, and that idea, the one she gave him freely, was now taking over his industry. He hadn't credited her, but the world had found her anyway. Outside, A digital billboard flashed. Vale Studio, coming soon to Portland. The promo showed a series of community spaces, designed with open terraces, warm wood tones and intimate corners. Kalin turned away, because even the ads reminded him of what he'd missed. Not just Serin, but the point. Back at Vale Studio, Serin stood over a long table reviewing final concept boards for a school rebuild project. Her lead architect leaned in and said, "Did you see the article? They called your style emotionally intelligent architecture." Serin smiled without lifting her eyes. "It took me years to realize emotions were an asset. And now?" the architect asked. Serin looked up. "Now I build with them first." The team went quiet for a second, not out of awkwardness, out of agreement, because she'd built a culture where empathy led, where dignity sat at the table, and no one needed to fight to be seen. Meanwhile, Kalin tried to rebrand. He hired a PR strategist to refresh his image. Less aggressive, more reflective, they said. He nodded, agreed to a low-profile charity gala and a panel appearance at an upcoming sustainability summit. But when they asked if he wanted to collaborate with another firm to help reshape his public tone, he said no, because he knew who they meant, and she had already outpaced him. He passed one of her buildings on the way home. It wasn't tall, only 6 stories, but the light coming through the lobby was golden. There were books in the window, children's art on one wall, benches under the awnings. It looked like a place people didn't just move through, but stayed. He stood across the street for a moment, just watching, not for her, for the warmth he hadn't known how to build. Inside her studio, Serin was asked by a junior designer, "Do you ever miss it? That phase when it was all so tied to someone else?" Serin thought about it, then said softly, "No. I miss who I almost became trying to make him feel whole." The designer exhaled. Serin had said what she hadn't known how to ask. And Serin? She wasn't angry when she said it. She was free. Kalin sat in his office, surrounded by glass. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a perfect view of the city he once called his own. It sparkled like always, blue lights, silver edges, endless movement. But it didn't move him anymore. The buildings were taller now, but they weren't his. Not the ones that mattered. Not the ones built with empathy. Those belonged to her. He opened his laptop and typed Vale Studio into the search bar. No press drama, no scandals, just articles, projects, recognition. One interview clip caught his eye. Serin, seated beside a fellow designer, talking about a recent community-led housing project. The host asked, "What do you hope people feel when they walk into your buildings?" Serin smiled, like they belong there, even if they've never belonged anywhere else. Kalin paused the video, let the silence stretch, because he remembered a time when she said those exact words to him. Over dinner, years ago, he had nodded, distracted, called it a sweet concept. And now? That sweet concept had redefined modern architecture, and he'd dismissed it. His phone buzzed. A text from a former client heard Serin might be leading the next civic project. "Want to loop her in?" Kalin stared at it. No bitterness, just a strange relief. Because for once, they weren't asking him to vouch for her. They were recognizing her on their own. She didn't need him, and he respected that more than he knew how to say. Across the city, Serin stood in a conference room filled with concept boards and lighting tests. They were finalizing a shelter space designed for mothers in transition, survivors of silence. One of the coordinators said gently, "Your touch is all over this place. It's calm, safe." Serin didn't smile for praise. She nodded. "I didn't want them to feel like guests. I wanted them to feel like owners of their healing." That line landed. The room stayed still. Then everyone went back to work. That's what mattered to her now. No more making points, only making progress. That evening, she received a forwarded message from her assistant. Someone had anonymously donated 500 library-grade lights to one of their underfunded sites. No note, just a reference tag for the corners that should never stay dark. She knew who sent it, didn't acknowledge it, didn't have to. Some gestures were better left unanswered, because healing isn't a conversation, it's a direction. And she had already moved forward. Kaylin drove past one of her new builds at dusk. The lights were warm. The windows glowed like homes, not investments. He didn't park, didn't walk in. He just nodded once through the windshield, as if saying to himself, "She made something I never could," and then he drove on. Quiet, still, but finally clear. Serin stood at the edge of a rooftop garden. Her breath turned white in the December air. Below her, the building buzzed with low voices and holiday lights. The community center had been open for just 5 days, but already it felt alive. Kids ran through the halls, mothers gathered in kitchen spaces, and the art walls displayed drawings in crayon and charcoal. She had made this. She had made this from nothing. And not once had she asked permission. Not from a board, not from Kaylin, not from anyone who ever overlooked her. A reporter approached her. He worked for a local architecture magazine, small but respected. "We'd love to feature your story, especially how you pivoted from behind the scenes to full design lead after—" He hesitated. "After all the press surrounding your previous firm." Serin's lips twitched at the understatement. "You mean, after my marriage blew up in public?" she said calmly. The reporter flushed. "Yes." Serin looked back at the city skyline. "I don't want to tell a story about betrayal," she said. "I want to tell one about vision. Because betrayal doesn't build things. Vision does." He nodded slowly, then quietly walked away. That was all she needed. Across town, Kaylin met with his attorney. He wasn't fighting anymore. No countersuits. No silent resistance. He had reviewed the final asset division agreements Serin sent. He signed every one of them. No edits. No questions. He even returned rights to 3 of her early design concepts, ideas she had sketched on paper napkins during their first years of marriage. "Did you want to add a clause for board credit?" his attorney asked. Kaylin shook his head. "She built them," he said. "I just sat beside her." At a private dinner weeks later, Kaylin gave a speech. It wasn't a corporate gala, not a summit, just a foundation dinner for underrepresented architects. He stood at the mic, pale blue light over his shoulder. "Most of what I built in my early days came from someone else's vision," he said. "But I took the credit because the world let me." He didn't say her name, but every room in the industry knew who he meant. "I'm not apologizing tonight. Not publicly," he continued, "because apologies in front of strangers feel cheap." A pause. "But I am redirecting every dollar from my early brand line to fund independent creators, people who know how to build from the ground up, not just from the top down." He stepped off stage to quiet applause. Not loud, but sincere. Serin didn't attend that dinner. She read about it later, didn't comment, didn't text, but she closed the article and whispered under her breath finally. The final restoration wasn't public. It happened in a small cafe near Lexington. Kaylin sat at a table with a warm mug in front of him. Serin entered minutes later, gloves still on, her bag slung over one shoulder. She didn't sit immediately, just looked at him. "You asked for this," she said. Kaylin nodded. "I won't ask for more," he said. "I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For doing what I couldn't, walking away, and then building everything I never deserved to touch." Serin finally sat, calm, still, beautiful in her quiet peace. "You were never the end of my story, Kaylin," she said softly. "You were the thing I survived to reach the beginning." He smiled faintly. "I figured." They didn't hug, didn't cry. They just sat for another 10 minutes, 2 people who had finally finished the war. The grand opening of the Hale Foundation drew a quiet but powerful crowd. No red carpet, no flashing cameras, but the people who came, urban planners, community advocates, single parents, even retired teachers, stood in silent awe as they stepped into the building. Warm lighting, open staircases, an atrium filled with artwork created by women who'd never once been credited in blueprints. Serin stood at the center. Her hair was pinned up, Her dress was deep green and simple, and her voice was soft when she greeted every guest. No one asked her who she was married to. They asked about the grants, about the mentorship program, about the youth workshop space named after her grandmother. For the first time in her life, Serin's name stood alone on something real. Not as someone's wife, not as an assistant designer, just Serin. Inside one of the side rooms, a young woman pulled her aside. "I followed what happened last year," she said nervously. "Your story made me leave my job. My boss kept taking credit for everything I did." Serin listened, patient. "I used to think I needed to earn the right to speak up," the woman said. "But after seeing how you handled everything, I realized I was allowed to just walk away." Serin didn't give advice. She reached into her purse and handed the woman a card. It was blank, except for a single line. "Build the version of you that never needs a permission slip." The woman held it like a key. Outside, Kalin stood by his car. He didn't come inside. He'd driven by once, then circled back. He saw the small crowd, the quiet reverence. He saw her name etched in brushed brass on the stone facade, the Hale Foundation. Not Asta, not anything linked to him. Just Hale. His hand hovered on the door handle, but he never opened it. Instead, he sent one text. "Your name never needed mine." "I see that now." He didn't expect a reply, and none came. Later that night, Serin returned home. She poured a glass of water, walked through her apartment. No designer brands on the walls, just framed sketches from when she was 22. A photo of her mother in the kitchen. A news clipping about the foundation ribbon cutting. She picked up her journal. One final entry. "I used to believe walking away was giving up, but I've learned it's choosing yourself, and sometimes vengeance is quiet. It looks like peace, it looks like success without shouting, and it feels like freedom." She closed the book. Outside her window, snow started to fall. Somewhere in Manhattan, a boy handed his mother a hand-drawn picture. It was of a tall building with glass walls and a garden on the roof. She asked, "What's this?" He smiled. "The Serin Building. For people who want to feel safe and seen." And in that moment, Serin's name passed into legend, not through scandal, not through pain, but through quiet impact, one drawing at a time. A year later, the Asta name faced its own reckoning. Kalin sat at the long boardroom table of Asta Holdings, alone. No legal team, no Pa, no Serin. Across from him sat an investor he once mentored. "You're asking for a reinvestment," the young man said. "But the numbers are down, PR's still shaky. And let's be honest, Kalin, you're not the man you were." Kalin didn't argue. "I built this from scratch." The investor folded his arms. "But now you're bleeding trust. Public goodwill isn't just stock value anymore, it's reputation. And yours tanked the moment your wife walked out with quiet dignity and never spoke a word against you." Kalin's jaw flexed. The young man stood. "I'll say this, though. She taught a generation what power looks like, without noise, without needing a man beside her." The door clicked shut behind him. Kalin stayed seated, in silence. For once, no voice in the room argued his worth. That night, he found himself back at the brownstone, not at the gate, not near her door. He parked on the opposite street. Serin's windows were lit, curtains drawn. A warm shadow moved inside. Music hummed in the background. He didn't knock. He just sat in his car and watched the life he no longer belonged to. And as snow dusted his windshield, he whispered aloud, "I traded gold for silence." And she never had to scream to make it hurt. Meanwhile, Serin was in her studio, tracing new blueprint sketches with her assistant. "Let's shift the center atrium here," she said, tapping the paper. "More light, more warmth." Her assistant nodded, scribbling notes. Serin paused, then smiled. "Also, include a second entrance. Quiet, subtle. Some people need to come in without feeling watched." The assistant hesitated. "Because they're scared?" "No," Serin said gently. "Because they're healing." Back at the Foundation's press office, a journalist prepared a new feature. Front page for a weekend insert. Headline: "The Woman Who Never Screamed and Still Changed Everything." It was a profile about her quiet rise, her refusal to exploit scandal, her silence as power. The editor paused before sending it to print. No pull quotes from her? "Nope," the journalist replied. She didn't want the spotlight. She said the work should speak. Bold move. No. That's just Serene Hale. Some stories end with fireworks, some with rings, some with courtrooms or scandal or a second chance. But Serene's, hers ended with no announcement, no grand finale, just a room filled with people she helped, a name on buildings she designed, and a generation of women who never forgot what quiet strength looked like. Serene entered Aurelio's with measured steps. The hostess recognized her immediately. "Miss Hale, your client's already seated." Serene nodded and followed her through the golden-lit lounge. Jazz floated in the air. Laughter blended with clinking silverware. This place hadn't changed, but Serene had. She wore a muted beige wrap dress. Understated elegance. No glitter, no flash. Halfway through the restaurant, she paused. There. That table, the one where her marriage ended. Kaylin was seated there again. Alone. This wasn't a planned encounter. Her client must have been delayed, or moved, or never coming. Kaylin stood slowly as their eyes met. He didn't smile, didn't reach out, didn't say her name, just stood, as if waiting for a verdict. Serene walked over, calm, no rush. When she reached the table, she looked at the empty chair across from him, then back at him, and said, "You didn't expect me to get up and leave either." She turned and walked past him. Kaylin stayed frozen. She didn't glance back, didn't look for his reaction. She didn't need it, because this wasn't about him anymore. This was her closure. Outside, snow fell again. Serene stepped into a waiting car, her phone already buzzing with Foundation messages. She answered the call, gave a short response, then looked out the window. Not at Aurelio's, not at Kaylin's silhouette, now standing behind frosted glass. She looked forward, because everything she needed was already ahead of her. Back inside the restaurant, Kaylin sank into the chair. He didn't finish the wine, didn't call anyone. He just sat there, at the same table, with no Serene, no mistress, no press, just him, and the consequences he earned. If you believe that walking away with your dignity intact can be more powerful than staying with someone who breaks promises, hit that subscribe button to Mr. Charles Stories. Comment your biggest takeaway. Was it her silence, her strength, or the way she built a life that needed no revenge, only standards? Like, share, and help others learn the same quiet strength.